All right, hello, how you doing? This is the 2021 Black History Month edition of Jazz History. We're going to start with the very, very famous Mr. Louis Armstrong. Because this is a Black History Month presentation, I felt that I probably need to give you some historical perspective about the world that Louis Armstrong was born into and then had to live and learn to prosper within. Now, the first thing you need to know is by 1832, there were quite a lot of free blacks in this country. And there were black codes passed to contain and curtail the activities of blacks, both slave and free. This occurred in 1832. A lot of these free blacks, starting somewhere around 1860, 1861, were being recruited for the Union Army. And in doing so, they created these brass bands. They look very much like what New Orleans bands look like today. Couple of trumpets, couple of trombones, tuba maybe, a couple clarinets, maybe one saxophone, 2 or 3 drummers, 12, 15 pieces. And these groups were taught by the best musicians to make African American musicians equal in every way to regular Army musicians. And they allowed the African American musicians to perform in their own way. So they kind of changed the music and changed the rhythm. Very big attraction to recruiting free blacks for the Army. And that was the beginning of our brass bands. At the end of the Civil War, a lot of these people stayed in and they played in these Army bands. Some of them would join traveling minstrel shows and things like that. Some of them would join other bands that had become independent civic bands and did parades and that kind of thing. And some of them would do society gigs, and eventually, somewhere around 1890, some of them started matriculating into Storyville, which was a gigantic entertainment area in New Orleans. It was in this context that Louis Armstrong entered the world in 1901. He was born in Storyville in New Orleans. And he got in trouble, called it Wharf's Home for, bad kids, learned to play the mellophone and the cornet, sing on the corners, blah, 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 hung around with the best musicians, had a great sound, became pretty famous around New Orleans. Eventually, he ended up following his mentor, King Arthur, up to Chicago to play in the Creole Jazz Band. And he hooked up with a lot of other great musicians in the Chicago area, and he also met and married his second wife, Miss Lil Hardin, who very quickly became Lil Hardin Armstrong. Yeah, she wrote a song for him called, let's see what it's called. Oh yeah, Strutting with Some Barbecue. Yes, she did. Now, Louis loved himself some barbecue. Now, as their careers would grow, Louis was attracted to New York City and Fletcher Henderson's band. And once he got to New York, he visited Chicago, but his home base became New York, and he and Lil's relationship ended, and Louis became this celebrated singer, actor, composer, arranger, trumpet player, cornet player. And he was also what we call the first black crossover artist, which means he appealed to black audiences and white audiences as well. Had many, many, many hits. Didn't have as many Grammys as you would think he would have had because, let's face it, things were a little bit restrictive. You still had, in the 20s, some very hostile racial policies. Matter of fact, President Woodrow Wilson was showing one of the most racial movies ever, Birth of a Nation, right there in the White House. So you had all these Confederate monuments being built, everything else, so it was a very hostile time. At the same time, you had the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance, the exploration of literature and art and music, and Louis was there for that, and his career grew. Believe it or not, his career lasted 5 decades, He performed with everybody from the original New Orleans type music to swing, and although he had a little disdain for bebop at first, he even embraced that for a while. He had hits as late as the 1960s, especially with his groundbreaking Hello Dolly. But one of my favorite tunes is It's a Beautiful Day and It's a Wonderful World. That's what I love about Louis. He could do anything, and he did it well. He even invented scat singing. Louis Armstrong is called Pops because he is the first great jazz musician. You need to know, Louis never really spoke out a lot on these racial issues that were all around him, except when black students were not allowed to go to school in Little Rock. He just got so angry about that and challenged the president to do something about it, and the National Guard was sent in. Louis went on a goodwill tour for the United States. He used his prestige and power to integrate the Little Rock schools. Louis Armstrong, Pops, Satchmo, Dippermouth, and his mother called him Louis. Thank you very much.